So now we will be talking with Carolyn Cox. Carolyn is a familiar presence to most of us in Lacey. In addition to her current 4-year term on City Council, prior to that, she was on Lacey Planning Commission, and prior to that, Thurston County Boundary Review Board. So a fairly wide experience level here. But what I would like, Carolyn, for you to do is to take 5 or 10 minutes to perhaps fill out that resume a little bit to let us know more about you and about your campaign and your plans for the future.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate the introduction. And before I launch into that, I just want to give Robin a shout out. You all gave her some really gnarly questions for a first-term candidate to respond to. And I think she did amazingly well. Robin is exactly where I was 4 years ago. And I mean, she is astonishing. And I encouraged her to run, but I also encouraged her to get some experience with the City Planning Commission. She's done that. She shows up. She's everywhere I go, there's Robin. And she is working really, really hard. And so one of the questions that you asked her was about name recognition. And I mean, we're all kind of up against it as we hopefully are starting to emerge from the pandemic. We have to kind of reinvent how we campaign. And one of the tried and true methods when you can't have a big in-person gathering or go knock on people's doors is direct mail and campaign literature that you can leave at people's doorsteps. And that costs money. And so, you know, anything that you all can do to help fund Robin's campaign and mine as well, we're going to need it because the Republicans are going to be shoveling bucket loads of money at our opponents. We already know this. I just heard late last week that John Pettit, who is one of the biggest right-wing organizers in the county, just threw a big fundraiser for our two opponents last weekend. And there'll be more where that came from. So again, Robin, nicely done. Really good job on that. So a little bit about me that didn't fit into your questionnaire is, you know, I hail from this little town in northwest coastal Florida called Destin. It's known alternately, well, its slogan is the world's luckiest fishing village, and it was a tiny fishing village when I was growing up there. Now it's referred to as either the Redneck Riviera or Lower Alabama. And I, still have family there, still have friends there, but could never live there again because I just can't breathe in that Tea Party atmosphere. I spent about almost 2/3 of my career as a newspaper reporter and editor, worked for 5 daily newspapers in Florida, Kansas, and Washington. Finally, in 2001, newsrooms were just getting to be very difficult places to work in as corporate ownership kept sucking more and more out of the local newsroom, which meant by the time I left there, I was doing the work of 3 people. And I'm somebody who takes pride in their work, and I wasn't able to deliver the quality of work that I felt like I should be doing. So I was casting about and found a great job at Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium doing public relations for them. And that was my first step into what they call government light. The zoo is owned by the Tacoma Metropolitan Parks District and has its own elected parks commission and all. And then finally, after almost 6 years there, and I mean, I'd still be there if it weren't for the commute and it weren't for, I just couldn't make myself move to Tacoma. I brought my work back to Olympia and got a job with the State Department of Health doing managing emergency communications for the State Office of Drinking Water, and learned an awful lot about how what comes from your tap gets there and all that needs to happen in between the time it's pulled from the ground to there. You've heard about my experience with the Planning Commission, as well as the Boundary Review Board and then the council. And I'll tell you that, I never really saw myself being a city council member until I got asked to do it once I was chair of the Planning Commission. And I really had to think hard because I'm used to being on the other side of the microphone or the reporter's notebook and not being the front-facing person. But once I saw, the caliber of people who were lining up to run for it, and I knew how critical a time we were facing in Lacey in terms of the nexus of rapid growth and what tends to happen to our precious natural resource when there's this growth pressure. I decided to take the plunge and jump in. And it was one of the scariest decisions I've ever made. I was actually in Tennessee at the home of an aunt who was, we thought at that point, on her deathbed, and having made that decision in her living room and then trying to start organizing the campaign from there. I ran on a platform, as was alluded to earlier, about of converting failing septics to our sewer system in order to protect our drinking water. I also ran on a platform of bringing bus service to Northeast Lacey, which was, in the transportation benefit district, and people who spent any money there and sales taxes weren't getting service in exchange for that. And then on growth management to try to protect our forest canopy and to keep Lacey lovely and livable as we grew. And those seemed like fine issues at the time to run on. Well, it didn't take too long on the council until the world started looking very, very different. And we've been, dealing with homelessness issues. We've been dealing, of course, with the pandemic. We've been dealing with climate change. We've been dealing with social unrest. And it's been a tough time on the council. And I can remember about a year ago, I was really starting to think about, wow, the rails could really come off the city here if the financial crisis tied to the pandemic gets as bad as people are saying it could be. And am I up to this? And trying to hold a city together, and really starting to have some thoughts about, maybe I should not run for a second term. But as time progressed and we got further into it and realized, no, the world wasn't going to, we weren't going to fall off the rails. And, we were able to do this. I think my confidence grew that I really could contribute something to managing multiple crises at one time. And then things started coming together. Like I served for over 2 years on the Climate Mitigation Steering Committee. And our plan came together, during this time. And it's now sitting, with the jurisdictions waiting for adoption. I was able to help co-found the Regional Housing Council. And this group is looking at housing issues from homelessness all the way to how housing strategies where we can encourage more affordable housing, to sharing resources. Like you're probably familiar with Lacey's accessory dwelling unit program, where, if you want to build an ADU in your backyard, you come to City Hall. We've got 4 different sets of architecturally approved and permit approved plans we will hand to you for free. And we'll waive your water and sewer fees. And, we've even talked to financial institutions to let them know what this program's all about. Getting out of your way to try to create more housing in Lacey where we can responsibly do that. I don't think we should get rid of impact fees altogether or permanent fees altogether, but I think there is a way to maneuver those a little bit in order to encourage more housing for all the way from, very modestly priced housing to market price housing. I mean, we're seeing the law of supply and demand play out in the housing market right now with just, put your house up one day and the next day you've got 5 offers or 10 offers and bidding wars on a house. I did see a tantalizing headline today that housing prices are starting to come down. Whether we're going to see that play out in Lacey anytime soon, I don't know. But I guess I would wrap this answer up by saying I am excited about the prospects of a new term. And I think it's taken almost a whole term to really get my complete footing, and in terms of realizing what the city realistically can do and how the role that I would have in shaping that. One council member out of 7 is a little daunting, but there are ways to make things happen. And one little success I had right off the bat was in 2018, a little, almost exactly 3 years ago. The Olympia Pride people just approached us and sent us an email and said, would you consider flying the Pride rainbow flag for Olympia's Pride weekend? And so I took that to the council and I said, guys, I think we should do this. And so we had a discussion, and before it was over, we agreed to fly it, not just for Pride weekend, but for the whole month of June. And there was a little bit of a grudging doing of it the first year. And this year we have the flag up in 5 public locations. So now one person can make a difference on issues big and small. And I feel pretty good about the time I've put in so far. Thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you for your service so far. You've given me a segue into about a dozen of my questions. So I'm going to see if I can get through some of this.
Hey.
Getting back to the Lacey police chief issue, Robin alluded that have some knowledge of this working on council. When we asked in our questionnaire about this, you had an interesting response. We had asked you whether or not, if you were satisfied with the process, you responded that you would like to see more involvement of residents. And then after expressing after articulating some of the difficulties that the process has had in getting a good pool of candidates to look at, you closed with thinking that we need to move forward with the pool that we have and make the best choice possible. Now, I know you can't reveal any confidential information, and I'm not asking you to do that, but do you think that there is still an opportunity for citizens to be involved in this process? And are you satisfied with the pool of candidates that we have to look at?
Well, I haven't seen the pool. I got an email from the city manager just today that I'll share with you on where we are with that. He said that last Friday, 7 candidates were interviewed with the goal of advancing 4 or 5 to the next stage. Successful finalists will be introduced to the community at a virtual community forum that is coming up on June 16th. I don't know the time yet, but if you can make a calendar note about that. It says the city will be soliciting community input on possible questions to ask the finalists. And let's see, June 15th is the forum, and then they'll do all-day multi-panel interviews on the 16th. There is an 8-member civic panel that's going to be incorporated as part of the process, and a representative from the newly appointed Commission on Equity will participate in the civic panel. So I think mean, I've been pressing for more citizen involvement. I know, like my friend Bill DePoto is very concerned about this, has been since the day I met him, and have tried to carry that interest forward. I'm told of the 7 of finalists, only 1 is a person of color. I don't think we have any women in this group, but I could be mistaken. And in conversations with the city manager, this is a tough time to be recruiting a police chief. A lot of people are leaving the profession. I think, they feel hammered, they feel unappreciated. I think it's gotten to be a more dangerous profession in some ways. And so it's hard. In the meantime, we've been with an acting police chief, who's Bob Almada, since late February of 2019 or 2020. And so I think it's, not fair to him to keep him in this role too much longer. That, he is, I think, one of the finalists, but when you're an acting chief, an acting manager, you just don't have quite the same gravitas. And I think it's harder, to go in and run your program and make changes. So, I mean, would I love to see a person of color as our chief? Sure. Would I love to see a woman police chief? Sure. But I think it's going to take somebody with the vision for the city of Lacey, who will absolutely, respect the police accountability efforts that we've been working on, who will help maintain the police department accreditation that Lacey has held since 2010, I believe it is, which puts us up to the highest standards. So I guess it's more important to me that we have an effective police department that respects its citizens, that doesn't play footsies with ICE, and that treats people well and keeps our community safe. I think.
All right, thank you.
Hope that answers it.
Yeah, I think so. It's obviously a very complex and difficult issue, and I understand what you mean about how difficult it is at this time. So switching topics some, Rory asked a question that addresses a couple of the different issues related to the nexus between transportation, multimodal options, and that kind of thing, and the potential climate mitigation benefits. So we've got not only livable communities issues, but climate mitigation and that kind of thing. And I know that you have done a lot of work on this, as you've already mentioned, on both ends of this topic. Mm-hmm. I just wonder if perhaps you could expand on that a little more and what your thoughts are for the future.
Absolutely. Well, one thing I didn't mention is that I've served on the Intercity Transit Authority since my election to the council, or being sworn in, and I'm chair this year of the Transit Authority. And one of the things that we work very closely with the city on is encouraging them to try not to have development that isn't accessible by public transit, to try to keep those areas as rural, as they can be. And I think we could point to Jubilee as a perfect example of a neighborhood that the city really wanted because it was going to bring in, nice property tax revenue, because there were going to be really nice homes out there. And this is, an example of I think kind of a annexation grab that probably shouldn't have happened at the time that it did. I think we needed to work our way up there. So I do believe in trying to keep urban density and have bus lines that can serve that urban density. I think a bus by itself, unless it's an electric or other hybrid bus, it has to be pretty full to offset private vehicles on the street because of the carbon it emits. We've been encouraging the staff at Intercity Transit to continue investigating getting more electric buses. We just had a hydrogen cell bus that came in to for us to view and tour and kick the tires and talk to the people about the infrastructure needed to support such a thing. So I think that's going in that direction, but it's going to take time. And there's a number of efforts that I think that we could potentially undertake, and Robin might be able to even tell me whether I'm a little far out in left field on this one. But one of the things I'd love to see Lacey do is work with the Department of Enterprise Services, which does these big bulk purchasing things for the state, to see if we couldn't take orders for people who are interested in purchasing an electric vehicle and buy the vehicles on our contract with the state, and then pass that cost savings on to our residents as an incentive for people to go ahead and take that step toward electric vehicles, and to do it now before the state mandates it. And then there'll be a rush for vehicles, and the prices will inevitably shoot up again. We're in kind of a tough nexus, because one of the things we're struggling with right now in Thurston County is we don't have enough mechanics who are trained to work on electric vehicles. I mean, I was at the Subaru dealership just a few weeks ago, and I said, hey, I'd really like to look at one of your Crosstrek hybrids, because I'm driving a 2005 Subaru Forester, and I'd really like to switch to at least a hybrid. And he said, we don't have any in Washington State. None of the dealerships in Washington have them. And I said, why? And he said, because we can't get the mechanics. So you'd have to travel to Oregon if you wanted to buy a hybrid Subaru, which I think is unfortunate, but it describes kind of this transition that we're into. And I think we're going to have to get creative about, okay, so we've got this great community college here. Why aren't they training mechanics, to work on electric vehicles or hydrogen powered vehicles? Or, why aren't we training more people to work on solar and wind and other forms of alternative energy? I mean, those are going to be good paying jobs. And I think our education system, we need to work with them to catch up on that. I mean, there are some efforts being made for sure. And I think St. Martin's has a great engineering program that's looking into some of those, but I think government has a definite role in helping these things along.
Okay, very good. Thank you. In your opening comments, you alluded to the potential financial difficulties that Lacey might face as a result of the pandemic and the economic upheaval that created. The city of Lacey is, as I understand it, set to receive $6.5 million from the federal government via the relief package. How can you describe how you think that money should be spent?
Well, I like to see it targeted at housing. And I think, the Regional Housing Council is working to try to find ways to provide the approximately 300 new units of what they call, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Anyway, support, permanent supportive housing. And this is for people who just aren't going to make it in the housing market, either, part of it's income, but part of it is just ability to manage day-to-day stuff. And that's going to look like a number of things, but sorry, I'm losing losing my thread here. Can you repeat the question, Dan?
What you think Lacey should do with the $6.5 million that we're going to get from
Okay.
the federal COVID relief?
Right. Okay. So I think the bulk of it should probably go into a pool of money toward buying or building supportive housing. And part of it needs to go, I think, to help tenants who are struggling to pay their rent. Because the last thing I want to see is more people out on the streets because they're evicted because they couldn't pay these rapidly escalating rental prices. You could make an argument for some other things, like we're part of the Thurston Strong effort. One of the things Thurston Strong supports is daycare. You can make an effort that we should, make an argument for helping people with their utility bills. But I just got some information today that Puget Sound Energy, I think, is willing to wipe out at least $1,300 in debt for a utility bill, or offer that much assistance for people who are struggling with it. So that, I think, means we don't have to worry about that so much for uses for that money. But when I talk about pooling this money, this is the jurisdictions that make up the Regional Housing Council, and that's Thurston County, Olympia, Tumwater, Lacey, and Yelm. And so by pooling funding, I think we stand a better chance of actually making projects happen.
Do you think that's a collaboration that's going to get legs, or is it already happening?
It is to an extent. We've got what we call tech teams who are working on various aspects of it. There's one that's working on like rents and how we help tenants through this. There's one that is working on affordable housing strategies. We are working in partnership with the Thurston Thrives Housing Action Team, which has most of the social service agencies at its table. And so, yeah, it isn't showing outwardly quite so much yet, but there's a lot of collaborative work going on by our staffs that I think you're going to see come forward pretty quickly.
Good. That's good to hear. So let's get back to climate again for a few minutes. Wayne Olson, I think, expresses for all of us, thank you for your support for the push for the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan. What do you see happening in the implementation and funding over the next few years? And do you think the outcome of the November election will impact that at all?
Well, it's really been a pleasure working on this plan. I'm actually Lacey's alternate to Cynthia Pratt, but this is such important and technical work that I've been going to all of the meetings and being told, no, Carolyn, you don't get to vote on this, but still feel like I kind of helped to shape some of the pieces of the plan. Lacey is a challenge. We've got this, you've got two council members who are just hard right. They're never going to buy it, no matter what you say or how good a deal or how much you could prove it's going to help people. And you've got the 4 Democrats right now, and then you've got one moderate who is kind of the swing vote. And so I think, I'm hoping that we can get the plan voted on and in the budget so that at least for next year, it will go forward, even if I'm defeated or Robin doesn't make it in. If either of those eventualities happens, I think it's going to be a tougher row to hoe with getting much out of Lacey. And I'm sorry to hear that. Say that, because I think, it's so short-sighted of council members to say, no, we're not going to spend money on that. You can't prove that it's going to change anything. We're just throwing buckets of money in, into the air, and it's not going to do any good. And climate change is a hoax, and all these things that you hear. But I think you have to realize too that of the current makeup of the council, 5 of our members are in business, and so they have a very business-like way of looking at the world, and so they want to see what the money they invest is going to do. And I think that tends to make those council members a little more moderate on the climate issue than Cynthia and I have been. So I think Robin and I come as a box set in terms of climate. And I think that, having her there, we can bring the other 2 Dems along, and hopefully our 5th council member who's a moderate, and make these things happen. But I mean, I can give you, a couple of, at least one inside example on as the Climate Mitigation Steering Committee was finalizing the plan and asking each of our councils to pass a climate emergency plan. Cynthia and I said, no, we're not going to take that to our city council just yet, because we saw it as red meat to the climate doubters and deniers. And we've really felt like we would have a harder time getting the plan through the city comp plan and ultimately back to the council and getting it adopted. It would give those people time to really mount a fierce campaign against it. So we decided getting the plan adopted and getting funding for it was much more important than a proclamation that makes people feel good, but it doesn't do much more. And I'll tell you, I just wrote the mayor an email today because he had said, well, we'll do it once we're adopting the plan. So I just today sent him a note and said, okay, we're probably going to be voting on this in mid-July. Are you ready to go with this proclamation? Or, where are you on this? So we'll see. But I tend to be kind of pragmatic with this council on what we can do and what the best way to get your ultimate goal accomplished is. And sometimes that may look a little like being wishy-washy or dragging my feet on things, but I'm really a duck with my feet paddling furiously under the water and trying to broker some of these things.
Well, it's good to have a realistic understanding of the environment you're working in, and that's good. I'm going to go back to the question that Jody Disney asked. How will you work to build collaboration with Olympia and Tumwater? Please break this down in steps, and what are your priorities for action? And I think that, the fact that you've been on council for a while, maybe you can talk about it from that perspective.
One interesting aside as I start to answer your question is I've been working on endorsement questionnaires and kind of going back to some of the things I was saying in 2017. And I came across, a statement there advocating for regional cooperation on big problems. So, and a lot of the tenure I've had on the council has been working toward regional collaboration on these very large issue things. The way to do that is to build relationships. And I have very intentionally set out to build relationships with our county commissioners, the Olympia City Council members, the Tumwater City Council members, and to an extent, the Yelm Council members. And I think those relationships really help make a difference when you come together to collaborate on issues. We give each other grace. We understand where each other is coming from. And I think it's really, really helpful. And so, you can see 2 great examples right now that are playing out. The Housing Council, which just got launched about 15 months ago. And of course, the climate mitigation effort has been going on for a couple of years and will continue for the next few years. And one other group that I'm at least exploring collaboration on is on race and social equity. And, Lacey is doing its thing with its Commission on Equity. Olympia has a similar effort going on. The county, I think, is at least looking at policy and maybe some other things. And there may be, without creating too much more governmental layers or putting too much more strain on our staffs, ways that we can exchange ideas, share what we're doing, look together into steps that we can take to make our communities more welcoming, more accessible, and break down institutionalized racism and the barriers to full inclusion into our communities. So I'm not somebody who advocates for a blue ribbon commission for every social problem, but I think the ones we've talked about here are ones that we're all facing, and they're all bigger than a single entity can fully solve. And why not? And I will say that the cooperation between the county and the cities is the best I've seen it since I've lived in Thurston County, and that I moved here in 1992. So that's, out of almost 30 years. I think that's a really good thing. So.
Indeed. Thank you. One last question then, if you could expand somewhat on an issue that you mentioned in your opening comments. Most of us, I'm sure, are aware that this issue of converting septic systems to city sewer has been high on your radar. And you mentioned some of the things that have taken place. Can you maybe fill that out a little more, how you see this process perhaps progressing over the next 4 years?
Sure. Well, we talked a little bit about the capital city estates, and so there's that one. We just got approached by a neighborhood out in Northeast Lacey that has failing septics, and they want Lacey to extend sewer service to them. I think we're inclined to do that. We just have to figure out, who pays what and who does what to make that happen. One exciting thing, and it hasn't come to a formal vote, but in a workshop setting, even our most conservative council members just agreed that in looking at rates and what they will fund, that we have a category for sewer conversion. And that has not been in place before in Lacey. So I think that is a really big, important step that we have to take. And it's one that I think we can take without having to bankrupt our ratepayers. I mean, I think, you probably might see a $3 a month or $3.50 a month increase to do the things that we're hoping to do. But I mean, I can remember a meeting 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, where they were laying out what it would take to put all of Lacey on sewer. And I mean, I don't think any of us could afford that bill to put us all on sewer at one time. And they literally were adopting a 75-year plan for sewer conversion. And that's, building out into the urban growth area. It's not, Lacey city limits proper, but it's that expensive to do all the piping work, to pay into the regional sewer authority. And so by having now agreed that we're going to have this conversion fund in there, I think we're going to get further faster with it. And I want to see us target the areas near lakes and near creeks, places where we know the groundwater table tends to be high and the wells may be a little on the shallow side, to try to protect our groundwater as much as we possibly can. And so prioritize those areas first.
Good. Sounds like a good plan. And yeah, very expensive. So thank you very much. If you'd like to take 2 or 3 or 4 minutes to wrap up, if you have any final comments you'd like to make about your campaign or anything.
Well, sure. Well, I mean, first of all, I would like to say I would be very, very proud to have your endorsement and support in this campaign. It would mean a lot, and it feels kind of like family. You know, you want your family behind you, and this group does feel like family to me. And I didn't talk about this earlier, but one of the reasons for serving on city council is that local government, way more than, federal or state or even county government, is closest to affecting your life. I mean, if the city doesn't fix the pothole and you hit it at a high rate of speed and it breaks your axle, that's not good. And we're lucky in Lacey that we have one of the best maintained, street programs in the whole state, sort of thing. But way more than street maintenance, it's the ability to help residents. Like as the COVID crisis was falling upon us, we were able to reach into city reserve funds, pull out $1 million and work with the Economic Development Council to offer $10,000 grants to small businesses to help them meet payroll, to stay afloat until the federal funding could start to come in, and money for social services to try to help people cover their rent, cover their utility payments, and childcare and other needs, just to try to keep the community afloat. That's pretty powerful stuff in terms of being able to affect people's lives so directly. Now, I hope we don't have to have another tragedy like COVID come along to be able to give an example like that. But it really does have a bigger impact on your daily life than you might think. I mean, you turn on your water tap. Well, if you're a City of Lacey customer, there are public works employees who are highly skilled and trained, who are treating the water to the highest standards to make sure that when you turn on the tap, water comes out and it's water that's safe to drink. So I just really treasure, being able to be a part of delivering city services and steering policy in a way I think that benefits us all. I will say one other piece that I feel like I've had a unique niche on the council, and that is because of my communication background. I've kind of been that voice that says, hey, we need to have a town hall. We need to bring the community in to hear their views on this. You need to get communications out to this neighborhood about this, and pushed and pushed and pushed. And I think our communications have gotten better. And we've recently employed an assistant city manager. And I had been pushing our city manager to get somebody at executive staff level with communication skills. And by golly, she has them. She came to us from City of Lakewood, and she was managing their communications as well as being an assistant city manager there. So that feels good to me, because if we're not communicating well with the community, I mean, how are you going to know, what's being done on your behalf? How are you going to know when there's an issue that you really care about coming up at a city council meeting or at a planning commission meeting or at a parks commission or historic commission meeting? So I think that communication makes or breaks one-on-one relationships all the way to, relationships between the city and its residents. So I can't stress how much how important that really is. I think I will leave you with that, and thank you so much for the opportunity to meet with you. And if there are any other follow-up questions, I think you all have my contact information. You
Yes.
need me to-
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes, thank you. And thanks again to Robin. And just a reminder to everyone, this video will be posted on the website at some point in the not too distant future. So if you or a colleague or a neighbor or a friend that you think would like to see it, let them know it's available. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.